The phone is face down on the table, screen dark. The room quiet except for the soft hum of ventilation and the distant tick of an air conditioner. No taps, no links, no oops, I clicked. And yet, right now, an invisible conversation is unfolding inside that device. A single weaponized message has arrived, been parsed by the operating system and detonated like a microcharge. Code you never saw slips past guardrails you never knew existed. Within seconds, microphones can wake, cameras can open, chats and photos and encrypted keys can be inventoried. The most secure consumer phone in the world, so the marketing says, just became an informant in your pocket. We are in the incident room for Pegasus on iOS, the mercenary-grade spyware sold by Israel's NSO Group and deployed by government clients around the world. This is not commodity ransomware blasting inboxes, not a credit card skimmer wedged into a compromised website. This is precision-guided surveillance designed to make high-value targets transparent to their adversaries: journalists, human rights defenders, diplomats, opposition politicians, business rivals, lawyers. The chilling part is not only what Pegasus can do once it's inside, it's how it gets in without asking your permission. Tonight, we're going to walk the floor of the breach from the inside out. We'll trace the moment of compromise that requires nothing from the victim, unpack the zero-day engineering that makes it possible, and watch defenders scramble to understand a payload that leaves almost no fingerprints. We will keep one baseline question in view. What does it take for a message you never even opened to become a master key to your life? The tempo is brisk, the language plain. Sirens are off, fluorescent lights are on. This is the Apple iOS Pegasus story as it happens. How it starts, how it spreads, how it's found, and how you fight it when it refuses to show its face. To understand Pegasus on iOS, start with the business model behind it. NSO Group doesn't sell a consumer app and doesn't run a subscription portal. It builds turnkey exploitation and surveillance platforms it calls lawful intercept tools, and sells them to government and law enforcement customers. The sales pitch is stark. Terrorism, cartel violence, child exploitation. These are the problems Pegasus claims to solve. In practice, a global consortium of investigative journalists and researchers has shown that the spyware has repeatedly been used against civil society, including reporters, political opponents, and human rights activists across dozens of countries. The gap between intended use and documented abuse is the gulf we're exploring. If you're looking for an origin scene, rewind to August 2016 and a human rights defender in the United Arab Emirates named Ahmed Mansour. He receives text messages promising inside information. He doesn't click. Instead, he forwards them to researchers at the Citizen Lab, who, working with mobile security firm Lookout, uncover a 3-exploit iOS chain later dubbed Trident. If the link had been tapped, Mansour's iPhone would have been jailbroken on the fly and implanted with Pegasus. Capabilities included turning on the camera and microphone, siphoning messages and calls, tracking location, and exfiltrating data from apps protected by end-to-end encryption by capturing it at the endpoint. That was the public debut of Pegasus on iOS, a rare real-world remote jailbreak against iPhone used for targeted surveillance. Apple patched Trident quickly, but the cat was out of the bag. The market for mobile zero-click and near-zero-click exploitation, the ability to compromise a phone with no interaction or with a tap that looks indistinguishable from normal use, was now publicly validated. The attack surface was not just the web browser, it was every service that processed untrusted content. WebKit, rendering engines, message parsers, image decoders. It turned out that the most intimate, convenient features of a modern phone were also a perfect delivery mechanism for advanced, ephemeral exploitation. Fast forward to 2020 and another escalation, an iMessage zero-click campaign against Al Jazeera staff, documented by the Citizen Lab. The operation needed no bait link and no social engineering dance. A specially crafted iMessage could achieve code execution simply by being received and handled by the device, a technique researchers dubbed Kismet. The next year, 2021, would bring a new, even more technically astonishing chain that detonated inside Apple's image processing code. A chain that would become the center of the story you're hearing tonight. Apple, for its part, hardened iMessage with a new sandboxing architecture called Blastdoor in iOS 14, corralling the highly complex, historically risky task of parsing untrusted message content into an isolated process with minimal privileges. It's a sound defensive design, a belt-and-suspenders approach that raises the bar and limits blast radius. But Pegasus developers responded with equal creativity, crafting exploits that use the image pipeline itself as a staging ground to build logic circuits out of compression primitives, and then using those circuits to escape the sandbox. If that sounds like science fiction, wait until we detail what Google's Project Zero found when they tore the payload apart. By mid-2021, the Pegasus Project, a collaboration led by Forbidden Stories with forensic validation by Amnesty Tech, publicized a list of tens of thousands of phone numbers selected by NSO's clients as potential targets. The list wasn't proof of infection, but when researchers obtained devices, they repeatedly found forensic traces of Pegasus activity. The fallout was swift. Global outrage, lawsuits, and, in the United States, trade restrictions targeting NSO Group. Apple would eventually sue NSO in federal court and launch threat notifications to warn individuals it believed were being targeted by mercenary spyware. August 2016. The Ahmed Mansour Textland, Citizen Lab and Lookout unwind the Trident chain. Apple ships an emergency iOS patch. The industry learns a hard lesson. A fully patched iPhone can still be remotely jailbroken by a determined, well-resourced adversary. Pegasus is no longer rumor. It is artifact code and infrastructure you can measure. July and August 2020. While many of us are working from home, a separate silent war plays out in the message queues of iPhones. Citizen Lab documents that 36 phones belonging to Al Jazeera journalists and staff were hacked using a zero-click iMessage exploit they name Kismet. No user interaction. A message arrives. The parser handles it. The chain executes. The device is owned. For defenders, it's a paradigm shift. Social engineering is no longer the gating factor. Patch latency and parser complexity are. Spring and summer. 2021 Citizen Lab tracks Pegasus infections among Bahraini activists and captures forensic artifacts of a new live iMessage zero-click chain. They call it forced entry. The payload targets Apple's core graphics image library, specifically its handling of JPEG-2, a compression format designed for monochrome images. A booby-trapped file disguised as a GIF but actually structured as a PDF with JPEG-2 segments triggers an integer overflow, which the attackers sculpt into reliable code execution inside the message parsing pipeline. This is all invisible to the user. There is no spinning wheel, no crash dialog. The only outward sign might be a transient spike in process activity. September 13, 2021. Apple releases iOS 14.8, macOS Big Sur 11.6, Security Update 2021-005 for Catalina, and watchOS 7.6.2. Buried in the notes is CVE 2021-30860, patched with improved input validation to block the core graphics mischief. Another bug, CVE 2021-30858, addresses a WebKit issue that was also observed in the wild. Apple acknowledges the vulnerabilities may have been actively exploited. It's a rare moment when a top-tier vendor, mid-product cycle, ships emergency updates across its entire device family on a single day. That's the kind of release cadence that screams something sophisticated and real is out there. July 18, 2021 sits in parallel. The Pegasus project hits the front pages. The number that dominates headlines is 50,000. The count of phone numbers on the leaked selection list attributed to NSO's clients. Again, selection doesn't equal infection, but the scale of targeting is breathtaking. Investigations subsequently verify infections on multiple continents, and the public narrative shifts from rare surgical use against terrorists to widespread abuse against civil society. November 3rd and 4th, 2021. The U.S. Commerce Department adds NSO Group to the entity list, restricting U.S. persons and companies from supplying the firm with goods and services absent a license. In plain English, a trade blacklist. Weeks later, Apple files suit against NSO and its parent company, seeking a permanent injunction to bar NSO from using Apple services and devices and to hold it accountable for compromising Apple users. These are not just technical countermeasures. They're legal and policy levers, and they will shape the industry response for years. December 2021. Google's Project Zero publishes a forensic autopsy of forced entry, and its analysis lands like a thunderclap. They show how the attackers use the JPEG-2 format not merely to compress images, but to emulate logic gates and build a miniature virtual computer inside the decoder itself. complete with registers and a 64-bit adder. That custom machine running inside the image pipeline then orchestrated the rest of the exploit, including the escape from Apple's blast door. It's a bravura display of offensive engineering. Despite hardening, Citizen Lab reports at least 3 additional zero-click exploit chains used in the wild against iOS 15 and 16 devices, including civil society targets in Mexico. The core lesson is that patching removes one path, not the adversary. A well-funded team is iterating rapidly and testing live against a complex evolving system. Attackers are reaching for new surfaces, wallet passkit image parsers beyond JBIG2, to find fresh footholds. September 7, 2023. The story repeats with new nouns. Citizen Lab discloses BlastPass, a zero-click iPhone exploit chain delivering Pegasus, and Apple responds with iOS 16.6.1 updates addressing CVE 2023-41064, a buffer overflow in image I/O when processing a malicious image, and CVE 2023-41061, a validation bug in Wallet that could allow arbitrary code execution via a malicious attachment. If forced entry was a masterclass in turning an image format into a computer, BlastPass is proof that even after blast door and multiple hardening passes, the messaging and image subsystems remain high-value targets for elite attackers. 2024-2025. Apple normalizes threat notifications to individuals it believes are being targeted by mercenary spyware. Investigative groups like Amnesty Security Lab regularly validate these waves by examining recipients' devices and confirming real-world exploitation attempts. In Washington, lobbying campaigns attempt to rehabilitate NSO's image, but U.S. policy holds. The entity list designation remains in place, and federal use of Pegasus stays barred. The arms race continues, but the defensive playbook now includes legal, economic, and user notification tools alongside code. Let's step through the mechanics of Pegasus on iOS the way a responder would reconstruct an intrusion after the fact. Start with delivery. In 2016's Trident, delivery was a one-tap link in an SMS or other message. The link chained 30 days to jailbreak the device, elevate privileges, and plant the implant. By 2020-2021, delivery no longer required a link you had to touch. An iMessage could contain a payload that the phone's parser would automatically process as part of normal message handling. The attacker's goal is to turn that processing into code execution, and then to convert code execution inside a sandboxed, unprivileged process into full device control. That requires not one vulnerability, but a set: initial execution, sandbox escape, privilege escalation, and persistence. In forced entry, the innovation is the choice of battlefield, the core graphics and image I/O stack that processes images and PDFs. The payload masquerades as an innocuous GIF, but its file structure is a PDF containing JBIG2 segments. JBIG2 is meant for lossily compressing monochrome images. It allows defining patterns and substituting them across the image. The exploit authors abuse that flexibility to encode thousands of tiny segments that, interpreted together, emulate arithmetic and logic operations. It's like sneaking a pocket-sized CPU into the decoder, one instruction per segment, then asking it to compute a path to arbitrary code execution. When Project Zero reversed Apple's patch and studied a captured exploit, they found over 70,000 JBIG2 segment commands used to define registers and a full 64-bit adder and comparator. From there, the chain pivots, leaking addresses and reshaping memory until it can hijack control flow. Why would attackers go to such lengths? Because iMessage is tough turf. Apple's blast door isolates and heavily restricts the environment that parses untrusted content. It's written in a memory-safe language, uses inter-process communication to minimize privileges, and is designed to fail shut rather than fail open. To escape blast door, an attacker needs a path from the isolated parser into a process with broader authority. The forced entry chain achieved that leap. Once outside, the next goal is kernel-level control, or a path to sensitive entitlements that permit deep device inspection: camera, microphone, messages, keychains. Each new milestone grants persistence options and greater stealth. The BlastPass chain in 2023 reinforced a related point. Image and attachment processing remains perilous because it's complicated. Even with blast door and years of hardening, a carefully malformed image or wallet pass could still trigger a vulnerability that leads to code execution. Apple's advisories for CVE 2023-41064 and CVE 2023-41061 are terse, as security bulletins tend to be. But the pattern is familiar to incident responders. A buffer overflow here, a validation issue there, and an acknowledgement that this issue may have been actively exploited. Every one of those public sentences is the tip of months of private triage. What happens after exploitation? The implant. Pegasus is modular, configurable, and adaptive. It aims to be ephemeral, often avoiding persistent storage or cleaning itself up after achieving objectives. When it does persist, it can use system-level tricks to survive reboots, hiding in places that blend into normal device activity. Once running, it inventories the device, model, OS version, installed apps, contacts, calendars, photos. It can request data from messaging apps, including those protected by end-to-end encryption, by accessing it on the device before encryption or after decryption. It can pull location in real time, activate the microphone and camera, and exfiltrate files to remote servers under the attacker's control. Much of this capability was described in early technical analyses and reinforced by later forensics across multiple incidents. Command and control. C2 infrastructure is designed for resilience. Researchers have documented elaborate domain fronting and fast flux style behaviors, with infrastructure segmented by campaign, country, or customer. Indicators of compromise are scarce and change rapidly. Domain names and certificates cycle, and payloads adapt to OS updates within weeks. From a defender's perspective, this is mercenary capability at nation-state caliber. Disciplined tradecraft, compartmentalization, and an understanding of how to live inside a target's normal network patterns without triggering alarms. Detection then becomes a forensics challenge. You're not likely to catch a running process labeled Pegasus. Instead, investigators look for secondary signals, unusual crashes in messaging or image processes at suspicious times, log entries showing the parsing of content types inconsistent with what a user actually received, or artifacts of the exploit chain such as uniquely structured files or cache entries. Amnesty and Citizen Lab have developed forensic methodologies and open-source tools that sift through backups and system logs to flag anomalies correlated with known campaigns. These are not push-button scans. They're careful triangulations that look for the shadows Pegasus casts when it tries to leave none. Apple's ecosystem hardening complicates an attacker's life, but doesn't stop this class of adversary outright. Data is protected at rest by hardware-backed keys. Code signing and the secure enclave constrain what can run. Sandboxing and entitlements fence off capabilities. The system aggressively randomizes memory layouts and rate limits brute force attempts. Still, any stack that must parse complex user-supplied data at scale will harbor bugs. Apple's strategy pairs engineering, blast door lockdown mode, with process rapid patch deployment, threat notifications, and partnerships with researchers who can validate and signal exploitation in the wild. Threat notifications deserve a special note. Starting in 2021 and ramping through 2024-2025, Apple sends targeted individuals messages warning of likely mercenary spyware attacks. These alerts are not perfect, no threat intel feed is, but they've become a critical early warning channel. Recipients can engage with digital security helplines and local experts, and researchers often follow up to confirm exploitation and extract indicators. As a policy move, this is powerful. It publicly attributes a class of activity without naming specific states and pushes the defensive conversation beyond patch and pray toward community response. The human impact of Pegasus on iOS is not theoretical. Journalists who believed their sources were safe suddenly learned their phones had been turned into wiretaps. Lawyers discovered confidential case strategy could have been compromised. Activists operating under repressive regimes realized their movements, networks, and plans might have been visible to the state in real time. In some cases, infections or attempted infections were linked to broader intimidation campaigns. In others, they preceded arrests or were discovered during crackdowns on dissent. The knives here are digital, but the wounds are not. Politically, the revelations detonated like a controlled demolition on multiple fronts. The Pegasus Project's reporting introduced the broader public to the idea of a commercial spyware ecosystem operating in the gray between state power and private enterprise. It undermined the "we only sell to responsible governments for legitimate purposes" narrative and highlighted systemic abuses. Countries alleged to be customers scrambled to deny or justify use, and headlines linked Pegasus to high-profile controversies from Europe to the Middle East to Latin America. The moral hazard was laid bare. If you sell an invisibility cloak, don't be surprised when it's used in places you'd rather not see. For Apple, the fallout was both technical and reputational. The company prides itself on privacy and security as product differentiators. Emergency patches and the introduction of lockdown mode signaled a willingness to re-engineer user experience in exchange for hardened defaults for at-risk users. And the lawsuit against NSO marked a rare moment when a platform vendor publicly targeted a specific offensive supplier. Apple framed the litigation as a fight for the safety of its users and sought a permanent injunction to keep NSO from using Apple products and services. Whatever the legal outcome, the message was unmistakable. If you spy on our customers, we will fight you in code and in court. Regulators and policymakers also moved. In the United States, designating NSO Group on the entity list made it harder for the firm to source technology and services from U.S. companies without a license, a financial and operational choke point. Elsewhere, investigations and parliamentary inquiries probed domestic use of commercial spyware, sparking debates about oversight, judicial warrants, and the appropriate limits of surveillance tech in democracies. The net effect has been to drag a secretive marketplace into sunlight, a place that makes it harder to do business as usual. Within the security industry, Pegasus accelerated a rethinking of mobile threat models. For years, defenders treated iOS as a fortress whose walls were so high that most enterprises didn't need to worry beyond lost devices and stolen passcodes. Pegasus proved that with enough resources and patience, attackers could climb those walls or tunnel under them without alerting the guards. That realization shifted investments toward mobile telemetry, endpoint detection tuned for iOS, and threat hunting that includes messaging and image pipelines as first-class concerns rather than afterthoughts. On the personal level, the psychological toll is severe. The very device that lets you organize a protest, record an interview, or coordinate legal strategy is the device that, if compromised, can betray you. "Don't click suspicious links" has been the security cliché for 2 decades. Pegasus forces a different posture. Assume contested space, minimize attack surface, and recognize that some risks cannot be reduced to zero by any amount of individual caution. That is a hard truth for individuals and organizations alike. So where does this go? First, zero-click exploitation isn't going away. Any platform that must automatically and silently process complex user-supplied data, images, fonts, multimedia containers, message payloads, will harbor exploitable bugs. The offensive innovation we saw in forced entry, building logic out of compression segments to compute your way out of a sandbox, won't be the last time a format's features are repurposed into an execution environment. The next chain may target a different parser, a new codec, or a peripheral service that processes rich content in the background. Expect attackers to keep looking beyond obvious choke points, into places where performance optimizations and legacy support intersect with modern complexity. Second, the platform's response will keep blending engineering and policy. Engineering means more isolation, more memory safety, stricter entitlements, and default-off pathways for high-risk features. We've already seen Apple introduce Blast Door and then lockdown mode to dramatically reduce the reachable attack surface for the smallest set of users under the greatest threat. Future iterations may go further, offering granular controls to strip rich content down to bare text for specific contacts or to firewall high-risk services by default when the phone detects travel to hostile environments. Policy means litigation, export controls, and procurement bans that change the economics of mercenary spyware. Apple's lawsuit and the U.S. entity list are not silver bullets, but they signal to investors and customers that this line of business carries political risk. Third, expect better early warning and community defense. Apple's threat notifications are part of a growing ecosystem that includes civil society labs, vendor threat intel teams, and regional response groups. When a wave of attacks is detected, the combination of platform-level warnings and independent forensics creates a faster feedback loop. Victims get help, researchers get samples, vendors ship patches, and indicators circulate. It's imperfect. Attackers adapt quickly, but it is miles ahead of where defenders were even 5 years ago. Fourth, enterprises will need to treat mobile devices as first-class endpoints, not just email viewers. That means investing in mobile device management with a bias toward least privilege, evaluating the business necessity of rich content features, and planning operational playbooks for high-risk personnel. For some roles, lockdown mode and its successors will not be optional. They will be the cost of doing business. Training must evolve too. Don't click suspicious links becomes assume linkless compromise is possible and plan accordingly. Finally, take the long view. The mercenary spyware market exists because it fills demand from states and agencies that want capability without building it in-house. As long as that demand persists and as long as procurement and accountability regimes are weak, companies like NSO, or the firms that follow it, will find buyers. The counterweight is multifaceted. Strong platform defenses, yes, but also credible costs for abuse, from trade restrictions to civil litigation to reputational damage that makes these deals unattractive. There is no permanent win state here, only a balance of pressure that keeps the most egregious abuses rare and fleeting. Here's the image I can't shake. A phone on a table, quiet and inert, while a message arrives that turns a compression algorithm into a computer that becomes a skeleton key. No action from you and no outward sign to bystanders. A flash of arithmetic in a corner of the operating system you never think about, and then the door is open. The Pegasus story on iOS is a mirror and a map. It reflects our moment, the privatization of elite offensive capability, the porous boundary between state power and commercial tech, the grinding pressure on civil society. And it maps the terrain defenders now have to cover. Not just firewalls and phishing drills, but the interior architecture of messaging stacks and image parsers, the legal and economic levers that shape the market, and the human relationships that turn a threat notification into a saved life. This is not a tale of hopelessness. If anything, the last few years show how quickly platforms can ship patches and harden designs, how researchers can catch ghosts by their shadows, and how public scrutiny can change the incentives of even the most secretive companies. But it is a tale of realism. The most sophisticated adversaries will continue to move. They will hide inside legitimate features and bend formats into weapons. Our answer has to be steady. Keep software current, minimize the attack surface for those at risk, invest in mobile forensics and telemetry, and back the institutions that warn the public when silence would be easier. Tonight we stood in the incident room and watched Pegasus work. Tomorrow the names will change, new CVEs, new chains, new euphemisms for old intrusions. The discipline remains the same. Treat the phone as contested space. Build systems that fail safely. Support the people most likely to be targeted. And never confuse quiet with safe.